All right, so welcome back. So in this lecture, we're going to start by looking at what is known as our osteon. So in previous lectures and in previous parts of this lecture, we've mentioned the idea of compact bone versus trabecular bone or spongy bone or cancellous bone. So for our compact bone, the structural unit that actually makes up the bone. So if you were to take the whole bone and look at what individual units make it up, it's made up of something known as an osteon. And the osteon is this kind of concentric circular structure. It's one structure, but bone is made up of many of them, and they're packed together very, very tightly. All right, they're sometimes referred to as Haversian systems, and so we'll look at them a little bit more closely, and we'll look at the different features of an osteon, and we will look at how it contributes to the overall structure of compact bone. All right, so when looking at compact bone, and looking at the osteon is made up of something called lamellae. All right. And lamellae are these circular rings of bone tissue made up of different cells and made up of some collagen fibers. And they're arranged in these circles. All right. So if you were to look at these individual circles that you kind of see over here to the side, and you can see this kind of histological image here, this whole circular structure, this whole thing is an osteon. Making up the osteon are individual rings that go around, and those individual rings are called lamellae. All right. This lamellar structure, this circular group of rings here, give bone its tensile strength, and so these are made up largely of collagen fibers. Okay, and you can see if you go over to the right in this image, the direction that these fibers are running. So these are the collagen fibers in the lamellae. Some are running kind of down and to the right, some are running down and to the left. And so the kind of crossing of these collagen fibers in these lamellae provide the bone with some flexibility and some strength in various directions, right? So we have different types of lamellae. We have interstitial lamellae, we have circumferential lamellae, concentric lamellae, but they're all in general these circular layers of collagen fibers and bone that help make up this osteon. Right now, in the middle of an osteon, we have a single central canal. This canal is also referred to as the Haversian canal, and running in this canal, you have nerves and blood vessels that supply the bone itself with blood and with nervous input. So in the previous part, we talked a little bit about the nutrient artery and the nutrient vein and whatnot. After that vessel enters into the bone, so after it perforates the bone, perforates the periosteum, it then begins to branch and divide. And as it does so, it travels up through the middle region of these osteons in this central canal, also known as the Haversian canal. All right. Now, off to the side of adjacent osteons, you have what are called perforating canals or Volkmann's canals. And these serve to connect adjacent osteons with each other and allow blood vessels to move from one to the next. Okay, so blood vessels can penetrate compact bone and provide the circulation to a more deep inner canal, to these more deep central canals. All right. Now, we mentioned in the previous part that we have different cells in the bones. One type is called an osteocyte, one is called an osteoblast, one's an osteoclast. And so we said that after the osteoblast secretes its collagen fibers and it secretes its osteoid, which is unmineralized or uncalcified matrix and unmineralized matrix, the osteoblast becomes trapped. And after it becomes trapped, it changes its name to an osteocyte. And so we can see the osteocytes embedded in these osteons, um, represented by these small little black dots that we see everywhere. All right. So the black dots represent a lacunae, and we said the lacunae or the lacuna is the space in which the osteocyte resides. All right. So that's the lacunae. The canaliculi that we see, and this is what we're talking about here, the canaliculi are these extensions out from the lacunae, and they connect adjacent osteocytes with each other. All right, so one osteocyte is able to communicate and relay information and signals to nearby osteocytes. And they do this through these branching small canals known as canaliculi. All right. So again, the space is known as a lacunae. In the space, you have the osteocyte, and the osteocyte itself has these extensions of its cell of the cytoplasm that extend out in spaces known as canaliculi. All right. So if you were to look at an osteon is similar to a bullseye, where the entire bullseye is, or I'm sorry, it's analogous to a target, and part of the target is the bullseye. So the entire target is the osteon, right? So the whole target is the whole osteon. The rings that make up the target are the lamellae, right? Those uh, concentric lamellae that run in a circle. And then the bullseye of the target is analogous to the central canal, also known as the Haversian canal. Right. So this is kind of a nice illustration to help you remember these. Now, the orientation of collagen, excuse me, of the osteons with the collagen fibers, but the orientation of the osteons determines the plane in which, or the direction in which, bone is able to absorb uh, forces and absorb compression. So the direction that these osteons travel, so they run the length of the bone, this means that the bone is able to absorb compression and shock and forces in that plane. So in the direction of the osteons. This is why you can jump and jump up and down and land firmly on your bones, and you're providing that force and compression parallel to the orientation of the osteon. But if you were to be hit from the side in the direction that the osteons are not running, or perpendicular to the osteon, then you have a much more um, you have a much greater chance of fracturing that bone. And we'll talk about fractures here in the next part or two. All right. So if we move on now, um, we also have trabecular bone, right? So we've mentioned compact bone and we've mentioned trabecular bone as well. But trabecular bone is the more loosely arranged, loosely gathered meshwork of bone that appears to be very branched, right? So compact bone is very dense, made up of the osteons, very tightly packed. For our trabecular bone, it's kind of the opposite. So it's very loosely arranged bone. It does not have the osteon as its structural unit. It serves as a site for where we have the red bone marrow, where the red bone marrow is situated for hematopoiesis. It also serves to decrease the weight of the bone a little bit. And like the osteons, where you had um, the direction that the osteon was oriented in, or the plane that it was oriented in, that same plane is the plane that we can absorb compression and shock. For our trabecular bone, you have these little spicules of bone, these little branching networks of bone, and the various directions also provide support in that plane. So you have some that run up and down, you have some that run sideways and diagonally and out towards you. And so this trabecular bone helps to also provide some support in multiple different directions. Okay. You have lots of the same things. You have osteocytes and you have uh, canaliculi and lacunae and lamellae, lots of the same things, but it's not organized into the same structure as compact bone. So, in other words, it's not organized into an osteon, right? You don't have that central canal that you see associated with your osteon that we saw here. Okay. All right. So, we're going to stop with this part. And in the next part, part 5, we're going to look at fractures, and we're going to look at different types of fractures of bones. We'll look at how you heal bone, and then we'll ultimately get into talking about how we actually make bone and how we lay down bone in a process known as ossification.